50,000 people had to die.
We could not get medical care.
Truthfully, in the early 80s, we said, you know, the word was, it's a white gay men's disease.
Hi there, my name is Christian Gordato, and I am 16 and a senior in high school.
Hi, I'm Jesse. I go to City College.
My name is Sarah Thomas. I'm 19 years old and I'm a sophomore in college.
I want to know what it was like to be one of the people in the forefront trying to fight for a sense of equality in the world.
I was expecting to have my mind blown by learning about reality that isn't my own and the hard work that people laid out for me.
I want to interview Kenji because I want to understand how he found inspiration and confidence within himself and within his gay community to really become an activist and put himself in a role where he was making a difference. So what was the social climate like in your community when you came out when you were 17?
The community then in Boston, which was an hour away from where I was living, was pretty small. The Gay Pride Parade in 1980 was 5,000 people. At the time, the local gay paper was actually firebombed, so the community and the tension was that if you were out, you were a target. If you came out to your family, you would probably lose your family. If you were publicly affectionate with somebody, you might get killed.
I knew I liked girls. I went to the University of Colorado in Boulder, and in 1983, when I was 19, I came out. My parents were okay with it. They didn't really want to talk about it. I don't have any siblings. My parents are both dead now, and none of my other biological family talks to me.
In my own coming out process, I buried my sexuality. I became a little hateful, little homophobic, sexist 20 or 21-year-old as I was trying to define my own sexuality.
The U.S. Supreme Court had just upheld the Georgia sodomy laws with the Bowers versus Hardwick case, which meant that states' rights still held, that certain states around the country had sodomy laws where if you had same-sex sex with somebody, you could be arrested for that and it was okay. It was a states' rights issue. By the way, that doesn't get turned over until June of 2003 with the Lawrence versus Texas case.
They share with me stories of parents who come out from Texas, or those that had a family that came out from the South, dropped their 18-year-old off, told them that they were going to be in a program, and left them here in the city.
I was very fortunate because in the women's studies program specifically, we had a lecturer there named Michelle Barali, and is considered one of the pioneers of queer studies now. But Michelle was at Colorado, and I took her classes, and they were coded, right? It was like women-identified women writers, because you couldn't say lesbian writers on the transcript. And even within those classes, she taught gay male authors as well, and we did do some transgender work and bisexual work. So at the time, I knew that I was learning something that most people weren't learning at university.
My own coming out process was also in the faith community. I saw these disco divas who were also gospel divas. And folks would teach you how to read, to speak up for yourself. You know, I remember someone saying to me, grow up and be a man, learn how to talk back. It's like, help. This is
like, we are talking back, we're doing it our way though.
Right, yeah, and you learn for every insult you had to come back, so that the whole thing was maybe I might be feeling hurt inside, but you're not going to hurt me.
It seems like just in this time when you're kind of gathering, in groups and numbers, all of a sudden was kind of knocked down by the development and discovery of AIDS in 1980.
So I was 18, 19 in the late 70s, and there was a period of celebration, of joy, of sexual pleasure that we were having that was amazing. And just before AIDS hit, I was sexually involved with a boyfriend or friends.
The whole AIDS backlash, though, it was pretty bad because there was this budding movement of the LGBT community. I mean, after Stonewall, the coming out of the strategies of the 70s was definitely working, and you had these gospel community choirs who were just fierce.
AIDS wasn't so much this thing that hit suddenly because we didn't know what was happening. It was this like fog that was creeping in where you heard about people who were dying and there were rumors of, and then the newspapers started to say, getting an HIV positive result just meant death. There was no treatment, there was no support, there was nothing. So why would you go get tested? I mean, why would I want to know?
And then all of a sudden you see these established Adonises, and they're strong and talking back. Physically, you start seeing them just kind of dwindle, and they're just kind of whittle away, which started feeding the church's homophobia. Then the ministers would say, well, God made Adam and Eve and not Adam and Steve, and we told you that this AIDS virus is killing people.
The gay male community and the lesbian communities were very separate. And this is the early 80s, and AIDS had started. It had already started devastating San Francisco and New York and Miami. And I started to see a really disturbing split between the lesbian community and the gay male community.
And it didn't hit home until somebody I worked with in a restaurant got sick and went to the hospital, and in 2 weeks was dead. It was a disease, and we didn't know where it was coming from. We didn't know how you got it. We didn't know if just touching each other was the way you transmitted it. But Mark telling me that he was HIV positive made me go out and get tested.
In some African American churches, I'm only from African American churches, but I still have the programs that I kept over the years. That one church in Boston on the back cover said, any unwed mother's membership shall be terminated from the church. A unwed father's membership will be terminated for 1 year. If you join this church, you must submit to taking an AIDS test. Yeah, that church membership in some places were dependent upon having a negative test.
The one story I remember hearing from a dear friend of mine, Ruth Mahaney, who was here during the early 80s when the AIDS epidemic first hit this city, was that there were posters up all over the Mission and the Valencia corridor saying, a meeting tonight at the Women's Building, we've got to help our gay brothers who are dying. There were over 500 lesbians who showed up, and I have heard countless gay men now who are in their 50s and 60s say, we wouldn't be here if the lesbians hadn't come and helped us.
Sometimes we had our clashes, but we both knew each other were gay men,
Yeah.
And so we're like in a bar talking, and he's like, have you seen the rates of infection for HIV in the African American community? And I was just like, I haven't really thought that much about it, because truthfully, in the early 80s, we said, the word was, it's a white gay men's disease. And so it's just like, don't date any white gay men, and you won't get HIV,
Did you feel like because you had your health, you were ready to go and fight the fight for those who weren't well and who were succumbed to AIDS?
I got involved because I didn't know what else to do. Everybody was dying. I needed somewhere to go with my fear, with my anger, with my sadness. Sure, I was advocating for people I loved. And it was Mark who redirected me to the group ACT UP, AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power. And I was able to take all that pent-up fear and anger and worry and channel it into AIDS activism, what was then the late 80s, now early 90s. You had to understand that we were the activists who were speaking up, we were the bad boys. People looked at us as like we were the bad queers because we were breaking the polite stereotype. We weren't nice. We were actually angry.
Some of the first African American AIDS organizations were not started by the folks with the PhDs and the masters in public health. They were started, like in Detroit, by that one was started by two friends of mine who were performers, drag performers.
The children?
Yeah.
The legendary children?
Yeah, who were tired of seeing their friends die, who said, we've got to do something. And so they started doing presentations. They opened up shop. They would open up shop in an abandoned building, until they got enough money to get an office, and just very, very basic grassroots organizing.
As an activist, how did you get your message out to the mainstream people who were not in these major cities and who were not directly hit by your voice?
First there was ACT UP, and at the same time, a little later, was formed a group called Queer Nation. And we were a queer activist group saying, we're here. Actually, our chant was, we're here, we're queer, we're fabulous, get used to it. Because they weren't used to us. I went to New York and was empowered by this voice, because here I was, a nice gay man who hadn't blocked traffic and had never gotten arrested, And I go to New York, and someone's handing out this broadsheet called Queers Read This. And on the back is an article called I Hate Straights. And what it was a tirade of anger about the mix of homophobia that was causing the fact that, you know, tens of thousands of us were dying. And to see this handed out and to see people blocking traffic as part of Queer Nation, I was really moved. And I was so moved that I helped raise something like $5,000 to get 5,000 copies of this brought from New York to Boston. And it was written anonymously, and its intention was to stir people up.
So what was the government's response to AIDS?
50,000 people had to die before Ronald Reagan said or did anything. So the answer is nothing.
We were 6 years into the epidemic. It was only the year before that Ronald Reagan, our president, decided to actually say the word AIDS for the first time publicly, even though one of his best friends, Rock Hudson, had died from the disease. In October, the second weekend of October, we had the National March on Washington for gay and lesbian rights. That weekend changed my life. We went to march. My mom was very worried. What if you're seen on national TV? What if the family finds out? And I said, you know, this is bigger than that. We got there, and there were 800,000 to 1 million people marching that day. And we were trying to get President Reagan to see us, to see all of the people who were there, who were supporting us, and who were sick, because we could not get medical care for all of the people dying from AIDS. At that point, it was the first time that the AIDS Memorial Quilt was unveiled in one piece.
Could you please explain more about what the quilt is?
Yes. The quilt started as the NAMES project, the AIDS Memorial Project, and it was started by Cleve Jones and other people here in San Francisco as a way to help the community find a way to mourn and to heal. And they invited anybody in all communities who had had a loved one who had died from AIDS to sew a quilt panel.
Just your whole description of the quilt and how they, you know, the bones and the blood to equal the amount of loss that you had, and it's so smart.
Yeah, no, they were really, no.
But it's not
really
smart in like a logical way. It's smart in this
media savvy way.
I do the job I do right now because of that weekend. As we were marching, it went from west to east. So the western United States got to march first, et cetera. But the people they let go first, it didn't matter what geographic place they were from, were people who were there, predominantly gay men, who were suffering from AIDS. And I have thought every day since then, what does that take that you're dying? You feel horrible, right? I mean, imagine when you have a flu, how you feel like garbage, right?
Yeah.
And the last thing you decide to do on the earth is to let yourself be pushed for equality and to be seen. And I thought to myself that day, as a fully well and able-bodied person, I owe it to every one of those people. And I thought, I can't ever be in the closet again. At any part of my life, in any fabric of my life, I haven't been from that moment on. And so that was actually the first National Coming Out Day. The world was watching us. And instead of just rolling over, we fought.
I think the other thing that AIDS did was it made us recognize that we were already part of the mainstream. We were the creative community. We were the PR people. We were the Hollywood people. Mm-hmm. And I imagine to some degree that it woke us up.
You can actually trace these issues about same-sex marriage right back to the AIDS epidemic, because we were in such a crisis. Many hospitals in this country wouldn't let people in unless you were related or married. And so I think that the changing notions of family structure and of legal documentation for us to protect one another, that the marriage issue goes back directly?
Being somebody who's been through it all and has been there, who has history behind them and a right to talk, real quick, what would you tell the children of today?
Oh, the same thing my mentor told me back in 1980 when I walked into his office. Baby, love yourself.
Knowing the information that Ardell, was able to shed light to me is really going to help me and propel my passion to really make a difference in the gay community, because knowing somebody else's story is really impactful and helps make your journey and your story a stronger one.
There are a lot of things in the world going on right now that I wish I can change, and what Kenji did in the 80s is an inspiration to me. Not only identify what's wrong, but to put myself in a place where I can do something about it.
I did this to learn history firsthand. You don't always get the opportunity to meet people who were there and can tell you the truth. I feel very satisfied in that I got exactly what I was looking for. It's important to meet people who worked very hard to lay the groundwork, and now it's just up to the youth to make sure that their history doesn't die.